It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brewers, a show where I brew my first pass of the Commander in front of us on a budget on my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. The deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. As well as I'd really appreciate if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, do all that YouTube stuff. I'd appreciate it. But today, we're continuing to run through Edge of Eternity's content, and today we're taking a look at Tannuk Steadfast second. A 4-mana red commander, Kabu pilot, says other creatures you control have haste, and artifact cards and creature cards in your hand have warp 2 and a red. So the way warp works is you cast it for that cost for the turn, and then it exiles itself at the start of your end step, and you can play it from exile on a future turn. So the goal of the deck is simple. Try to find some really scary things to warp in, potentially try to cast them back out of exile a second time. And then, since Tannuk gives all of these things haste, right, when they come in, maybe we try to take advantage of multiple combats to really utilize these scary threats for our benefit. But I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in seeing all of our videos just a little early for just $1 a month, consider checking it out down below. Well, there's a lot of things you could choose to warp in. I think probably one of the most popular is there sitting on the middle of the screen in Blightsteel Colossus. A big 11/11 trample, infect, indestructible. And if we put it into a graveyard from anywhere, you reveal it and put it with shuffle into its owner's library. But it doesn't get put in the graveyard; it gets exiled. Trample and infect is a brutal combination, especially right since you only need 10 poison counters to knock out a player, and the goal would be to put someone in real threat. But it's not just that. I think Tannuk giving everything we warp in haste gets to change a little bit of what we choose to bring in. My thought was something like Blast for his Hellkite, giving all of our creatures that are attacking our opponent's double strike, and allowing us to get more damage right out of our combat. Cavern Horde Dragon, when it hits a player, makes a treasure for each artifact that player controls. This is really nice when we go to eventually try to cast our things back out of that exile, right, to take advantage of that. Now, warp is an alternate casting cost, meaning that when you cast something like Cityscape level, you're still going to get its cast ability, and it's going to come in and be able to attack and destroy another non-land permanent. Drakaseth deals 4 damage to each target, 3 damage to each other, 2 targets whenever it attacks. So you're basically getting 10 damage worth of damage to targets just for 3 mana, warping it in and attacking. Atali has that classic attack trigger, exile the top card of each player's library, and we can play any number of spells from among them without paying their mana costs. So a good way to potentially cheat out some fun things from both ourselves and our opponents, right? Ilharg's one of those creatures we don't mind hard casting, but if we do, whenever it attacks, we can put a creature card from our hand in the battlefield tapped and attacking. This might be able to overwrite Warp for us if we want to just put something in tapped and attacking. It gets bounced back to our hand and we get the next upkeep. Or sorry, it gets bounced back to our hand at the beginning of the next end step, but still lets you just take advantage of particular things that either have great ATBs or great, stats in combat. Maelstrom Colossus is another creature that we'll be able to cast for 3, but it'll cascade for 8. Meteor Golem, whenever it comes in, destroy non-land permanent opponent controls. Again, good way to get rid of something key. Molten Primordial says whenever it enters for each opponent, we just gain control of a creature they control till end of turn, and they get haste. So a good way to steal our opponent's things and get attacking with them. Overload of the Boiler Bridges. Bilges, whenever it comes in, whenever it attacks, you deal 4 damage to any target. So when it comes in warped, it'll deal 4. When we attack with it, it'll deal 4, and then it, go back into exile, right, where we can then get it again and hopefully spread some damage around. Scatterbeam Battalion says when it enters, if we cast it, we create 2 tokens that are a copy of it. So we're going to warp it in for 3, get its 4/4 body, make 2 copies of it that aren't going to have to exile at the end of turn, and then it gets put into exile. But the point is you're just getting so much value for that 3 mana. Terramount Velis handing out double strike whenever it attacks. Twin Flame Tyrant doubling the damage the source we control would deal. Just trying to get more damage across to our opponents. Extinguisher Battleship comes in interesting board wipe. Whenever it comes in, we just destroy a non-creature permanent and deal 4 damage to each creature. Yes, this will take out Tannuk in the process, but I think it's well worth it for a 3-mana board wipe that could potentially take out each creature. And then later, it just comes a nice big flying 10/10 threat to our opponents. Again, Ingenuity Engine gets to Cascade for just 3 mana. and you can actually sack an artifact to bring something back to our hand. We could potentially just warp it over and over again, depending on, what we have on the board. Port of Phyrexia, forcing everybody to sacrifice 3, and then beginning of our upkeep, put a creature card from a graveyard back on the battlefield. Again, if we warped it in, it won't see the upkeep to bring something back, but forcing the sack of 3 creatures is a huge deal because a lot of decks are not going to go wide enough to really take advantage and survive that. Spine of Ishsath, come in, destroy a permanent, and whenever it's put into the graveyard, you bring it back to your hand. But again, it'll go into exile that we can then replay later. Okay, the thought here, right, is that, okay, so we're going to play these things, we're going to warp them, and then they're going to go to exile and they're going to sit there, and we got to play these 8, 9, 10 mana permanents. How are we going to do that? Well, you have things like Jeska's Will or Mana Geyser that are going to hopefully just net you a ton of mana in one turn. You can look at this 2 ways. You could look at this as a way to play things from exile, or you can look at this as a way to get a couple warps per turn. Either way, the point is to generate mana so that you can play these things, either back from exile. Seize the Spoils, big score, unexpected windfall, draw spells that let you pitch something away to get a couple cards, make a couple treasures, just to set up the board state to cast these things. Then you have something like Seething Song, right? Pay 3, get 5 red back. Again, the whole point is just trying to go up on mana as you try to either warp from your hand or cast things from exile. Cage Sun, doubling up all of our mana. Our mountains are going to tap 4. Warp Space says we can pay 0 for the first spell we cast from exile each turn. So really nice, right? Letting us get those key things back from exile. And right, taking advantage of the biggest thing we can cast. It also lets us exile the top card in each of our turns. And then the Eternity Elevator feels like a ton of fun. So it comes in and taps for 3, but you could station it to add a mana of any color. Now, if the creature's not going to attack that you warp in, you could use it to station the Eternity Elevator. Eventually it gets to tap for X mana of any one color, where X has a number of charge counters on it. Once it gets to 20 plus, just netting you enough mana to warp as much as you want, get back as much as you want, and probably just take over the game from that point. Then the thought is, well, okay, let's say I warp a creature in. How do I take advantage of just using it for as much combat potential as I can? You have things like Karlach that can get you 1 additional combat each turn. Also gives them all your creatures first strike. Scourge of the Throne, if you attack the player with the highest life total or tied for it, you get to untap all attacking creatures to get additional combat. Neheb's going to look a little odd because this is beginning of your post-combat main phase. You get a red mana for each 1 life your opponent's lost this turn. But Neheb kind of plays a dual role, right? It is going to be used for the next slide, but Neheb also can just net us enough red mana to potentially just play some things back out of exile that we warped on future turns. But the ideal part of the Neheb is Aggravated Assault. 5 mana just to take another combat after this main phase and untap all creatures you control. Again, warp some key things in, get in, net the mana, right, and then keep going. You can use things like Reaver Cleaver that make treasures equal to the damage the creature's dealt, and there's other ways to take advantage of Aggravated Assault, but I think it's a fair way to say, all right, warp a couple key things in, and then try to take advantage of 1 or 2 extra combats while they're down, or more than that, right, to close the game out while you have them there temporarily, and just have a ton of fun. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. This is my first pass at Tannuk, and I think going into testing, we could find better things to warp. Something like Utvara Hellkite would get you a 6/6 dragon to stick around, and then it would go into warp. You could look at something like Blade of Selves, attaching it to a key creature and getting copies of it that could be particularly brutal, right, attacking your opponents. And then my thought was something like Sunbird's Invocation. I remember that Warp is an alternate spell cost that you're casting to cast the spell, meaning that you could still do this pseudo cascade with the Sunbird's Invocation on these big spells. There's a lot of different ways to play with it. I was trying to go for taking advantage of the Warp specifically, but there's a lot of ways we can back this up as we see the deck play out and see where our lines are going to be. But let's do what we love to do on the channel the most and get into our playtest. Remember, the goal of playtest on our channel is not to find magical Christmas land. It's not just to show off all our best plays, but it's to get in some gameplay scenarios and kind of understand what we're looking for and how we're going to set things up. So I've got a 3-laner here. Remember, Tannuk is 4, but we do see Lightning Greaves. Interesting. Can get on Tannuk potentially the turn he comes down. Mirror March, whenever a non-token creature comes in, you flip a coin till you lose a flip, and you get that many copies of it with haste that you lose at the turn. Sneak Attack can allow you to bring creatures in with haste, but you have to sacrifice them in the beginning of the extend step, and then there we see Ilharg. So I don't mind this at all. Gonna be just some setup to get there, right? There's the Greaves. And then we see a Jeska's Will. So Jeska's Will could potentially net us, what, 7 red this turn? If somebody still has that many cards left in their hand. Could get us Tannuk and a Warp. You know, my thought is if somebody really does truly do this for 7, here, get the Greaves attached to it. You know, we could warp in the Ilharg, just cast it on a future turn. We want to. We have enough mana to cast it on a future turn. Take the attacks, right? Then it goes to exile. As much as I love sneak attack, I don't really love it, nor do I really have much to play anyway. So I think I would just play the sneak attack. And then here on turn 5, I think I would just cast the Ilharg back from exile off the warp. It'll get haste, but unfortunately just don't have any creatures to put in. Here, I'd love to try to get something like Mirror March down before Skitterbeam. Mainly because then it just gives me the up chance of more value off of the Skitterbeam. But I think it just makes sense to warp it. Get a couple copies of it. I guess we also could, now that I'm realizing it, we could still play the Mirror March, attack with Ilharg, put the Skitterbeam in, tapped at attacking. We would just lose them to the Mirror March trigger, right? Because the Mirror March trigger won't let those tokens attack, right? They came in after Skitterbeam already attacked. So I guess, you know, we could have always snuck attack it in as well. But either way is right. It goes to exile. These stick around. The ones that we got off the march go away, but these stick around, right? Then this turn, I mean 7 mana, so I can't exactly play back off the Skitterbeam. Oh, sorry, Skitterbeam goes back to my hand. That's right. We put it down with Ilharg. I apologize. So now, again, we could warp it if we want to. But again, I think it makes more sense just to keep putting it down with Ilharg. The real copies that got made. Oh, no, it's only when you cast it. That's right. Sorry. It's only when you cast it. Again, we just put it down each turn if we want to. So maybe it was better off to warp it last turn, right, to get the copies. And then this turn, we need 9 mana, right, to get it back. Just take the attacks, right? All right, well, we're drawing lands. Unfortunately, we just aren't at that 9 threshold for the Skitterbeam to get it back. Again, continue to attack with these guys. Sees the spoils can help. Pitch the Blaster Sack, draw 2, make 2 treasures. So we've got 5, 7 mana. There we see Sundial the Infinite. Basically can end the turn, stop Tannuk's ability from putting it back in exile, and then just that big Darksteel Colossus. So what, 3 there. 3 for the warp. Let's see. We'll call heads. All right, so we already failed once, but that's okay. Sundial can basically keep the Darksteel Colossus on the battlefield. We also conversely could just put it in with Ilharg, right, attacking. Again, the only downside there is that you don't get the chance of the Mirror March going off. And again, okay, a little bit awkward on the first one. We missed out on the bigger creatures, right, or the potentially really high upside creatures, but we kind of saw, you know, what we're trying to do. Here we're keeping a 4-lander with the Mind Stone, so we got lots of mana potentially. We got the Battleship, we got Cavern Horde Dragon. My thought on the Cavern Horde, or on the Battleship here, is use it, you know, use that on your opponents. If your opponents get really ahead, you know, use it to just, oh, I just realized it's 4. So it won't kill Tannuk, which is almost better that way. I thought it would, but I guess I didn't realize he was a 3/5. So we have 5 mana. We could hard cast Terror of the Peaks, but I kind of want to hard cast this Rain of Riches. The reason is because then you could start cascading into just bigger and better things. Yeah, we take the turn off, but remember that I think the ideal part is that is still a cast. So you can still cascade off of warping this with a treasure, right? So go ahead and basically cascade for 9. We see Professional Facebreaker, so it comes in. Cavern Horde comes in. I've still got 3 mana left. That only goes off on the first one that I use for mana. Again, maybe the hope is to attack here, get a couple treasures from somebody's artifacts, probably make at minimum a treasure from Facebreaker because that Cavern Horde is in the air. And then it's going to go away, which is unfortunate. Remember, it gets the reduction for the number of, highest number of artifacts an opponent controls, right? There's Cityscape, another great one to warp in. We could kind of work it well with Terror of the Peaks to deal out that damage if we wanted to. But again, 2 of it, use a treasure from that to warp it, get the Cascade. We see Trumpeting Carnosaur, which comes in and discovers 5. That's the sneak attack. Cityscape Leveler comes in. We're on cast. We got to get rid of something. These guys both have haste. They get to attack. And then Cityscape, right? Goes into exile, and we get to keep that Trumpeting Carnosaur on. You can see why that could be so beneficial. And then here, I'm able to just warp this in. It would nuke the Facebreaker. We get at least, I would guess, 2 treasures last turn from Trumpeting and Cityscape attacking. But this, it would knock out our own Facebreaker, but it would probably just deal with a lot of our opponent's things. Go ahead and Cascade for 8. And we get into Might and the Meekstone. Potentially could either nuke somebody's things or draw 2. I think if there's something that's really 5 toughness that won't die to the battleship, I think we'd do that. Otherwise, I think we'd just draw 2. The battleship comes in, destroy non-creature permanent. 4 damage to each creature. The Facebreaker goes away, but that's a-okay. I've still got 5 mana left. I could go into like Jeska's Will and net a bunch of red mana. We could just warp in something like Maelstrom Colossus and just see what happens. Try to Cascade for 8. Fire Crystal's not bad, reducing the cost, giving everything haste. Now again, we still get to attack. We could, if we want to, use the Maelstrom Colossus to turn the battleship online, get a 10/10 in the air instead of that just 7/7 with Cascade. And again, take the attacks. I think we're in a good spot here. Hopefully we'll start having enough mana to get things back out of exile, right? And Cavern Horde should ideally be getting cheaper enough that we can do that. Let's get into playtest number 3 here. Keep it a 4-lander with a Ruby Medallion, reducing our red spells by 1. Spine Rock's interesting. Once you hide away 4, and then you could cast it if an opponent's been dealt 7 or more damage. Kind of thinking just turn 2 Medallion here. There's the turn 3 Tannuk. Right, red spells costing 1 less. Let's get the Spine Rock in. Remember, hide away 4. Oh, looks like it's Mana Geyser, right? Good way to net a bunch of mana. I could go for something like Skitter Beam, right? Warp it in, get the copies, attack with it, and then, go into exile. Here we see Twin Flame Tyrant giving all of our things double damage. Doesn't seem like a bad idea with the Skitter Beam Battalion. We could warp in Portal if our opponents are getting out of hand. I love the idea of warping in something like Tannuk. I would imagine that Ruby Medallion would reduce the warp cost, right? Because you're casting a red spell. That is at least how I would interpret that, because when you use something like Impending or other of those cast abilities, they get reduced by abilities. So I would assume that would mean Atali's only 2, right? And then we could even just go for like Twin Flame for 2, right? Go in for Atali, attack. Ours is Combustible Gearhulk. See what everybody else has. Might as well cast the Gearhulk, right? Because then it won't have warp, right? And then take your attacks. We didn't leave up enough mana to crack the Spine Rock, although we probably would have. And these guys go into exile. And then as we come back to our next turn, again, Atali's only 5, and it does come in with haste, so it might not be bad to continue, right, digging for some more value. Go to combat. We see Blightsteel. We get to cast Blightsteel for free. Unfortunately, can't attack this turn because that Atali is an attack trigger. But again, I think now our opponents are just in a ton of trouble. That's all that I've got for Tannuk for you. Very interesting deck, built to be kind of scrappy. Warp the right things in at the right time. I'm sure you could change up your creatures, make them a lot better, make them hit a lot harder, and have a lot more fun. But I'd love to know what you think of Tannuk, and I will catch you on the next one.